Each year, we are very fortunate to be joined by the MLB data team, and they're here to share the latest Statcast updates, among other things that are happening at the league office. Here today are Jason Bernard, Senior Manager, Baseball Research and Development, Graham Goldbeck, Data Quality Analyst, Kevin Hanson, Senior Technical Product Manager, Do-Hyoung Park, Statcast Data and Gaming Engineer, and Mike Petriello, Stats Analyst. Take it away.
Thank you, Scott. First of all, I want to thank everybody here. Truly heroic turnout for 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Very impressive. Thank you. So we're going to split our thing into two sections. Myself, Jason, and Doe are going to talk about Baseball Savant, and then Graham and Kevin are going to follow us with some other things of interest. For those of you who don't know us, what we do work for the league. We are one half of the Baseball Savant team. You can see which three are us. Obviously, relatively small team. Jason and I have kind of been doing this for a long time. Doe is a brand new addition. I should say 2015 case competition winner, Do-Hyoung Park, has joined us. So what we do is we try to take as much of the fascinating Statcast data as we can and publicize it. One of our biggest issues, I think, is the fact we have so many different audiences. People in this room, I think, want to consume it at a very high level, as do the teams. But we also support the broadcasters who consume things at a different level, and just common fans try to write things in a way that my dad can hopefully understand. And no disrespect to my dad, but he's not a super baseball nerd like everybody here. So each year we try to put out 4 or 5 good releases of new metrics. Some of them are really cool and visual and fun, and some get wonky. And this year we're going to have a little bit of both. So what we're going to do today, Jason's going to talk a little bit about what we did add last year, some cool stuff in case you missed it. And then Doe and I will take you through some of the cool new things. Jason.
Thank you. I want to give a bit of a programming note before we start. What I'm going to go over is stuff that is actively live on Baseball Savant. So as I bring them up, you can go to the website and we will take no hard feelings if your head is down on your phone exploring. Also, any explainers that I give, there are also further explainers on the site that go into more detail that we probably don't have a lot of time to go into for a lot of the more complex items. So with that, we'll start with the first one, which is we revamped the top portion of our player pages for pitchers. Instead of what used to be just distributions and averages for what a pitcher threw, we have a more complete look at how a pitcher's makeup is. So more focus on their movement, and in addition, at the bottom of them, you can see their repertoire and frequency and average pitch speeds. But the highlight of this is a more focus on their pitch movement and how they kind of a more complete picture of how a pitcher is. And when I say that, I don't only mean the pitch movement, I mean the lines that you see represent their arm angle, which, if Mike goes to the next slide, is another thing that we debuted last year. And if you focus on the middle image, the best way to explain this is you are taking a horizontal line from the shoulder, and the other line is from shoulder to the ball when the ball is released. And if you have not seen this before, I would highly recommend going to the leaderboard, because one of my favorite things that we did last year was you are able to make a GIF animation of all the pitchers and have it rotate, so you see them kind of rotate around the person in the image. And that really shows you a lot of the diversity of pitcher, views that batters see, and really gives you a perspective into how difficult batting is, even more so today than just it's a round ball and a round bat. In addition to arm angle, a quality of life change, and probably one that bathes off some of the pitchforks from the pitching community, is we've added in induced movement, which seems like a small thing, but we recognize that it's more in the vernacular than what we were showing previously, but there's also some value in what we previously had. So in our leaderboards and on our game feed, we've included the induced vertical break to kind of highlight the differences between what we've previously had and what is pretty much in the mainstream and what people are talking about today. So that's the pitching side. Next, we did a revamp of our base running metric. Our main base running metric was base running run value. And last year, we decided to split that up into multiple components because there are two main components to base running that are very separate skills. The first, which is the one on the left, is base stealing, the value a runner has from their base stealing alone. And the one on the right is the value the runner gets from taking extra bases. And I don't know if you can see the names, but there aren't any names that are both the same on those tops. And that's for a reason. These are two very different skills that I don't want to say a batter, but runners can take advantage of based on how they're going. And then we take the total run values of those and we add them together, and that's our new base running run value. In addition to those, a really nifty extra component to this is being able to see how much distance a runner gains in this particular case on stolen base attempts. And I happen to guess that if you had to think of a good base runner on the Dodgers, Mookie Betts probably wouldn't be the first name to come to mind. But as you can see, Mookie Betts is really good at taking extra leads on the bases on his stolen base attempts when he chooses to go. And last but not least, a very small minor update that we did last year, no one really noticed, is our bat tracking. And so the way I kind of view how we kind of have V1 there, and the way I view this is that we're setting a foundation. We're setting the foundation for how our future updates will kind of go upon the original. Kind of the same way when Savant started, our first leaderboards were about average exit velocity. And while there is, at the time, there was some static in there. Now, at this point, we are far removed from looking at average exit velocities as meaning much. So our foundation for bat tracking has been bat speed, which is just a simple average of bat speed. Fast swing rate, which is the amount of swings 75 miles an hour and over. Squared up rate, which is, I don't want to mess this up, so Mike correct me if I get this wrong. It is the amount of exit velocity you are able to attain from the potential available based on your bat speed and pitch speed on the play.
Yeah, good enough. Yeah. If you get to 80%, it's a squared up.
There you go. Yeah, that was close. And then blasts are a combination of your bat speed and your fast swings and your squared up percentages. And the one thing on there that's also worth noting is swords, which is depending on where you fall on the batter pitcher spectrum, is either a great thing or a horrible thing. So in our terms, it's a very fun thing because it's a different way of viewing that batter pitcher relationship. And I think the public has a lot of fun with that data set on a nightly basis. But that's enough of 2024. I think you guys really just want to see 2025 stuff and what's cooking in the lab. So for that, I'm going to pass it on to Do.
I'm just trying to displace Mike. I promise. I warned him in advance that I'm a stander. So we're progressing temporally through the 2024-25 window here. So my section is the coming very soon to a baseball savant near you section. Before we go deeper into bat tracking, because I know that's what you all are here for in a lot of cases, this is a bit of a lower hanging fruit item, quality of life item that we debuted, I think, earlier this past week. Mike put out a good series of informative threads out about that. Pulled airball percentage, AKA our batted ball profile table. So this is live on Savant right now. Again, Mike, we officially launched it earlier in the week. And obviously this is data that we've had. This is data that's been accessible to the intrepid Savant user in the past through just our search tool. But also we felt it an important service right now, especially at this point in time where hitting conversations are, to make this both more accessible, sortable through a leaderboard, filterable through our more powerful leaderboard filters that you have on hand there right now. And just because pulled just the distribution of batted balls and pulled airball percentage in particular are terms that are entering just more of our hitting conversation, both on the process side, obviously, in terms of what's being taught to hitters, expected outcomes, desired outcomes, and because it also demonstrably correlates to positive outcomes on the hitting side from an outcome perspective. So this exists both on in a leaderboard format. Obviously, Isak Paredes being number one on that leaderboard very much passes the sniff test. And it also exists on player pages where we, again, had the ground ball, air ball, pull straight, oppo percentage in a table before, but now we get into it with a little more granularity with the combinations of launch and direction. Okay, so it's 9 a.m., as Mike mentioned. So we figured we would lead into this section with a little bit of audience interaction. Just feel free to shout it out if you want. Maybe not if you work for a team, because you might already know this. But all right, we've got some use cases here for the next set of data that we're going to launch. For example, who sets up shallowest and who sets up deepest in the batter's box? Any ideas? Anybody? Javi Baez, that's a good guess, but no. So we left the jerseys on board here, so that might have given you a little bit more of a hint. But the man on the left is Jose Altuve, and we are measuring this based on his center of mass, which we define to be the midpoint between his two hips as he sets up for the pitch. So he is 11.2 inches behind the front edge of home plate. And on the right, that's Matt Vierling. Yeah, who would have thought? Well, we did, but now you guys know too. 37.1 inches, but that's kind of leading to why we are releasing and what's significant about this data right now. That is a more than 2-foot difference between Jose Altuve and Matt Vierling in where they set up for a pitch as they get ready. Correlate, we didn't have many guesses when the jerseys were visible, so I don't know that we'll have many guesses when the jerseys are not visible here. But you also see who sets up closest to home plate, who sets up furthest away from home plate, so crowding home plate, or standing far away from home plate. I guess I'll open it up for any guesses here. No, also a good guess though. Right team in that case, I think, in terms of the jersey at hand here. On the left, closest to home plate, that is specifically right-handed Ozzy Albies, though I think left-handed Ozzy Albies also crowds the plate pretty considerably. And it's Goldie on the right. And again, we see the kind of range of data that we have here. It's not quite 2 feet, but it's about 17 inches of spread between our minimum and maximum here. So we have that data available. I think it's going to be coming to a Savant near you very soon. And we're going to have it not only in tabular form, but a first ever look at where batters are standing, not just by center of mass, but we have the foot positioning data. And you will be able to visualize that through a new tool that's going to be launching on Savant soon. There's going to be a couple different views in there. There's a zoomed out view of a working version that we've had on the left side. And you can also zoom into each corresponding batter's box, get closer looks at where everybody stands, and again, highlighting where their center of masses are with respect to the plate and to their respective batter's boxes. And so you can kind of see how the data is going to be presented a little bit, and we love our extremes. So you get to see our extremes here. If you don't watch a ton of Cleveland Guardians games, or I guess it's kind of tough to tell from the center field camera that that's kind of the default presenter view at times for games. Stephen Kwan stands with his feet pretty much touching. Now you know, he is, in terms of distance between feet, which is obviously a natural extension of this data, 8.8 inches apart on average for his feet. So you see that here, and on the other side, you see Ryan McMahon at 45.3 inches between his feet as he sets up for a pitch. He's not quite as much of an outlier as Quan is, as you see kind of in the little snippets of table that you see at the bottom of your screen, where we're able to highlight not just depth and box distance of off plate, but also, the distance between his feet and the stance angle, aka how closed or open your feet are with respect to the pitcher. And in fact, you see on the left that McMahon is such an outlier in that regard that his foot doesn't even show up in like the section of visual that we had allocated to his front foot. You see it kind of peeking in behind his face there. So obviously, this is exciting data for a couple reasons. I personally like this because it has a direct visual correlation to kind of how we approach and absorb the game of baseball, right? This is not something you need to be able to understand like a swing length or an ex-Wobicon for. This is something where just from day one, you look at a game of baseball, you notice how a guy sets up in his stance and where he sets up in the batter's box. And even before the bat comes off of his shoulder, even before we start talking about reaction times, bat accelerations, swing lengths, anything like that, this is what starts the hitting chain. Even before the bat comes off his shoulders, it's a matter of where does this guy set up in the box, how close to the pitcher, how close to the plate to put himself in the best position possible to get the sweet spot to the ball given his individual swing metrics. So this leads not only to obviously possibilities in next level data analysis, especially as it pertains to hitting, but also just anecdotal. It's another anecdotal tool to help us tell stories about the game of baseball and ask questions about the game of baseball. One example that you're going to see when this data launches, PCA is one of our test cases here where you can derive a meaningful conclusion from this data because PCA moves about a foot back in the box from June to September. Obviously, if you are maybe on the Cubs beat, work for the Cubs, or just are paying closer attention to that sort of thing, this is something you know. But again, this offers a tool for reporters like our Mike Petriello to perhaps pick the brain of a PCA for insight on why this happens and what it can tell us about how he approaches hitting. So why did you move back in the box now becomes a question where we don't need to wait for some guy to just anecdotally tell us or qualitatively tell us or notice in a ballpark. Now we can say, hey, you are moving back in the box by a foot. Why? And you got a pretty good answer from PCA here. Obviously, when you move back in the box, you're trying to give yourself more reaction time, but also turns out there is a big hole in the back of the box because everybody's back foot is on the line back there. And so he is just trying to work his way around that hole and make himself comfy in the batter's box. So now we know. I think the other side of this is Victor Robles. I think we also found him to be have a pretty considerable pattern in his position. I think he moved up almost 2 feet actually from the course of his start of the season with the Nationals to his end of the season, a pretty good end of the season at that with the Mariners. Okay, one last thing for the road. This is a corollary of the batter positioning data because now you know where a batter stands, and obviously we know more about his swing now than we had before. So this also leads to, again, another section of this visual, the bat ball intercept point, whether or not he makes contact with the ball, but just where the bat and the ball intercept in their various paths through the bat ball interaction. So this is a toughie, but it's who makes the contact furthest out in front of the plate, who makes their contact deepest, aka who reaches out to meet the ball in front of the plate, pull the ball, or who, quote unquote, sees the ball the deepest before he hits. And we will find, we wanted this to be Isaac Paredes, but, and oh, how glorious would it have been had it been Isaac Paredes again, but it's not. It's Hunter Renfroe crashing the party. 38.6 inches in front of his center of mass. That's where he, on average, intercepts the ball. Isaac Paredes, though, is second, so all is right in the world. So we're going to have this data available both in terms of his center of mass, so 38.6 inches toward the pitcher from Renfroe's center of mass, but it's also going to be available just on an absolute scale in that coordinate system based on the front of home plate. So you're going to be able to see the intercept point data both ways. And it's Goldie again, who quote unquote sees the ball deepest. It's just 19.9 inches in front of his center of mass, but obviously we're not talking in front of the front of home plate here. We're talking behind the front of home plate in Goldie's case, and in the case of a handful of other guys. All right, so that is our immediate future or present in 2025. And now we got Mike back for the deeper future.
So one quick note on the stuff you just saw. That's the beginning. It's not the end, right? So with a lot of those visuals and data, the question is, well, why? Like, what does it mean? You know, is it good to stand back in the box? Is it good to make contact out in front? Does it correlate to power? Some of those questions I don't know the answer to, but I look forward to finding out. But it's also pretty fun that when we put that data out there that I know pretty much everybody in this room will also be trying to find out. And we'll be writing cool things. Hopefully some of them will be published and sent to us because I would love to see what you guys come up with. There's so many brilliant people in this community who come up with really interesting takeaways. So that's part of what's exciting about this is getting it out there, seeing what stories can be told. As Joe alluded to, he got to show the cool pictures about where people's feet are, and now I get to get real wonky with angles and acceleration and stuff. So the batter positioning thing was kind of an offshoot of our main winter project, which was what's next for bat tracking. Everybody's always asking, hey, when can we get attack angles? Well, that's what this is going to be. This is going to come out a little bit after the batter stance stuff. This is a still image. I do have video versions of this that I will show you in a minute. Dana Bennett does a lot of the great visuals for our site. He's put a lot of work into the 3D motion here. And we're going to have attack angles, attack direction, swing path. The difficulty here is going to be explaining this to anybody who's not in this room. Most people think they know what an attack angle is, but until it's explained to you, it's maybe not exactly what you think it is. As Tom is fond of saying, attack angle is also a timing metric because the attack angle changes every single frame as the swing moves. And so it can change a little bit based on how you swing the bat, sure, but also where you make contact. If you're out ahead, if you're behind, the attack angle is going to change. You'll be able to see that a little better in this visual I'm going to show you. So, all right, this is Freddie Freeman. This is hopefully going to loop a couple times. I think first of all, setting aside all the fancy numbers, it's just fun to watch the skeleton swing. Like, if you know what these guys look like, the next one I think will be really obvious. But yeah, this is what Freddie Freeman looks like. And obviously this is not a 100% finished product yet. We need to do a little bit better job, I think, of context and averages that we're still working on. But just to tell you a little bit about how this visual was made, this is not one particular swing. This is not, June 2nd in the third inning or whatever. In order to make a visual look like the guy actually does, Tom came up with a way to sort of aggregate similar kinds of swings based on similar pitch location, bat acceleration, and all that. So this is an amalgamation of 20 to 30 maybe swings all put together. And I'm pretty happy with the results because it sure looks like the guy, right? Which is exactly what we're trying to get to here, which is super cool. So that is kind of calling these the A swings, right? So that's Freddie Freeman. I think you're going to know who this next one is. You'll see his face, but trust me, it's going to look like him. Yeah, right? Low, fast swing. And if you watch this real closely, and I'll run it again, watch the numbers on the right change. Right? The attack angle, the attack direction, it's all changing with every frame. So if he makes contact here, well, it's going to be different from if he makes contact here. And I think that is going to be our biggest difficulty this year is just explaining to people, okay, what is attack angle? Where is it measured? How is attack direction measured? What's the swing path, right? It's different than maybe there's some, sort of available vertical bat angle stuff. This is not identical to that. But we are looking forward to having this, for every player this year. I can tell you right now, this visual will not be available for every single swing for a lot of reasons, but we'll have at least one of these, per guy per season, and maybe a little more as time goes on. There will be leaderboards, obviously. So I think if you look at the top and bottom of the attack angle leaderboards, these names will mostly make sense. I always like to look at when these names first come out. I'm always like, is this pass the smell test in any way? And as soon as I saw Yandy Diaz and Vlad Jr. on the lowest attack angle, I was like, yeah, okay, I think we got something here. That makes sense. Tyler O'Neill is obviously always trying to have this very vertical swing. This is going to help us to tell some stories that we've always wanted to. Like I go back last year, what was one of the biggest stories of the spring, at least in New York, Anthony Volpe is trying to flatten out his swing. Is that true? I couldn't really tell you at the time. Now this is the kind of stuff that you will be able to tell those stories. And I have a really good Corbin Carroll example in a minute. But just in terms of getting to the context and the difference beyond the numbers, I pulled the biggest uppercut swing and the flattest swing. And I think if you look at the swing path there, it's pretty clear. Like that's a massive difference. And it's interesting because even at the extremes, these guys are Major League Baseball players. They're going to have a decent swing. Nobody's swinging like straight up over their head or doing a Tiger Woods golf kind of thing. So you're not going to get to like wildly different things. But if you want to really look and say, how different are guys' swings? This is, I think, a pretty compelling difference to me. And then getting back to the kinds of stories you could tell. Corbin Carroll here in Arizona, right? Pretty lousy first half last year. Pretty great second half last year. You know what happened, right? Injury, timing, comfort, who knows? Well, Nick Picoro had a pretty good talk with him last May, and Carroll said he made his bat path too flat, which I found really interesting because you're just hearing guys talking about the opposite. He's too flat. I got to get steeper. So this is a sample of part of our leaderboard. So ideal attack angle over there. It's 5 to 20 degrees, at least for the moment, unless we change it. The reason we pick that is we're always trying to come up with a way to contextualize stuff. Nobody knows what a 7-degree attack angle is going to be. But if you can say, hey, the best grouping of attack angles that leads to the most production, that's where you want to be. And I think it's pretty compelling. He wasn't doing that early last year. It was too flat. He had to get it steeper. And then he did. Now, I don't have a screenshot of the ideal attack angle leaderboard to show you, but I can tell you it's kind of weird. The names at the top, like Christopher Morel was up there, and he had a terrible season. And that stood out to me like, hey, why are we saying this thing is valuable and this guy was not a productive hitter? And I think it's a couple of things, right? Like, as I said before, it's somewhat a timing metric. He might have been very well timed, but, missing it high or low or, hitting the bad luck or whatever. Maybe that's what the Rays saw in him when they traded for a guy who was not performing, was things like that. So we don't necessarily have all of the answers yet, but once we put this stuff out there, like I said, it's going to help us try to get to some of these answers. One other thing, like I said before, we try to toe the line between what can broadcasters use, what can writers use, and sometimes we try to get really deep for the people in this room, and that's what this is going to be. If you like acceleration values, there are so many acceleration values right here. We talked a lot about like which one to show. So that first one there, the gain in speed in miles per hour that's highlighted, that's going to be our primary one that shows up. But since there's so many other ways to look at it, we thought there's really no harm in putting this out there for people like yourselves who want to use it. Like, I don't necessarily think that there's ever going to be a broadcast that shows this leaderboard because it's a lot. But for people who really want to get deep into the weeds of the physics and the acceleration, it'll be there. And I think it's going to be interesting. The names at the top make some sense, but it's not a 1-to-1 correlation to fastest bat speed. So this is the kind of stuff that I think you will be able to dive into really deeply and tell us what you value from here, what works for you and what doesn't. Yeah. Well, so every column is a little different, right? They're telling you something different. So the one that's highlighted is if you take you see the little guy down there, right? The little yellow lines that are dotted on the bottom right. Yeah, any group, of 30 milliseconds, which one's the fastest? Where is his bat moving the fastest? You can go through all of these other ones and, it's his first 15 miles an hour who accelerates the most in milliseconds. Like I said, this is wonky. I would not pitch this to you, Brian, to show on your show necessarily, but you can look at things in terms of time, in terms of speed, really however you want to do it. But I think this is for more power users than. Yeah. All right, so that's the second. This is going to be our second big release. There's something else we're going to do later, hopefully this year. I'm not going to put a time on it because I don't think we have one yet, but the goal is to have it out later in the year. Every bat tracking thing, for the most part, has been very batter focused. Right? You can get some pitcher value out of who's preventing, squared up rate and all that, but I think for the most part, everything we're showing is very batter focused. Well, we want to do something for the pitchers. So our next thing here will be a couple of things. Miss distance, right? Who misses the bats by the most distance? I want to know which curveball misses the bats by the most. I want to know if, let's say, an aging pitcher, his curveballs are missing bats by maybe a half an inch less each year. Like that, I don't know if it's true, but I think it could be cool. And then also we're going to do some timing things. Like, so on the right there, you can say, well, who's, from a batter and pitcher point of view, who's on time the most, who's early, who's late? I've got two good examples to tell you here. Which pitcher's fastball last year, and I'm pointing at Clay because I'm stealing from his presentation over here, made batters the latest, right? If you think about the bat behind that 8 millisecond mark, which pitcher's fastball made batters the latest? And it's not a guy who throws 103. It was Cade Smith, who had an amazingly good year, but doesn't throw 103, doesn't have crazy rise. Why is it him? I honestly don't know. I'm guessing it's something to do with the deception or pairing with this splitter, maybe. But I think that's cool. The other thing is, just last week, Jason wrote all the code for the batter part of this. We looked at who was going to lead in on-time rate the most. And as soon as he shared his SQL query, I looked at it and I said, do I see Stephen Kwan and Luis Ariz like at the top of your list? Great. Signal acquired. We're doing something right. So that'll be cool. So it'll be about timing. We're also going to do it in terms of 3D space, like who's missing the bat, above the bat, below the bat, right? Inside, outside, being jammed and all that kind of stuff. And then I want to briefly tell you a quick story here about some of the questions we have to answer. You would think if you said, okay, well, who misses the bat by the most? That's a pretty simple question, right? We have the 3D space of the ball and the bat. That's a question we can answer. And then we did it. And then we realized that some of them, batters were being jammed inside, and it was coming up as a very small miss distance because it almost hit the handle of the bat. That's, inarguably true. But then that's not really the spirit of what you're trying to do. Like the batter might as well miss it at that point. No one's trying to hit the ball with the barrel of their bat. And this is, again, is pulled from Clay's good work. So the reason I have that colored in green there, that's the top half of the bat. That is really what the batter's trying to do. So you can have all the data you want and you can have all the right questions, but then you actually have to sit down and define it and see, like, does this actually work in terms of what the human beings playing baseball are trying to do? So when we do miss distance, it's not going to be about any point of the bat. It's going to be about, the top half of the bat, because that's the point, even though technically there is bat below. And that's just sort of a window into the sort of questions we ask like every day when we think we know exactly what we want to do. And then you have to wonder if it works in the real world. So this will be coming at some point later this year, and some other smaller things along the way too, because we've always got more ideas than time to do any of them. So that is our bit, and we'll take some quick questions and then hand it over to Graham here. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Hey, yeah, exciting stuff. For the bat acceleration, I'm not sure if this would mean something, but for a singular value, would you think about plotting like the acceleration curve and just taking the derivative of that and doing like the max value, max instantaneous acceleration?
That is a better question for Tom Tango, who I think is watching and is not presently here. I guarantee you, if you email him or tweet at him, he will tell you all you want to know about that and more, because I honestly could not answer that question intelligently.
I will note quickly, it's different than sprint speed in the sense of you're taking the maximum in a whole line. Your acceleration can change drastically in those different compartments, which is why we're showing it the way we are. So you can see that gradual change of, is he fastest in the the onset of the swing, in the middle of the swing, or towards the end? So I think that's kind of the goal of how we ended up trying to show all three rather than a max in a whole kind of scale.
Like trying to communicate the context of where in the swing the acceleration might
Right.
matter. Cool.
Yeah.
Hello, thank you. Amazing data and visualizations. I have a question. I think most of the interest is in like players' variability and how to quantify them. But on the other hand, we also have biomechanics and data-driven development. So I'm wondering if you, from your data, have you observed there is less and less differences between players over years about how they play? And would you expect to see that?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if we've ever considered it that way. Some of this data, we don't have a lot of years of it, right? So the bat tracking data only goes back to the middle of 2023, which is not a huge sample. Like an example I always like to use is Justin Turner, really good hitter, really slow bat. Is that just the way he's always been, or is it because he's now 38 and we don't have his data when he was 28, right? So I think some of that will reveal itself over time as we have years and years of this data, because like for pitch velocity and movement, we have that back to 2008. So you can tell that story, but for some of this stuff, I just don't think we know yet, because it's the right question to ask.
Thanks. Will there be ways to kind of parse this by stadium? I've heard things like Seattle, for example, there might be some batter eye effects and that people don't seem to hit as well. I'm kind of curious if you can break it down and look at stadium effects and how they relate to some of these metrics.
Yeah, I don't think that would affect the biomechanical stuff at all. Like that's should be pretty consistent. That's more of like an outcome thing where the guys just can't see it. Now, could you find some of those effects in terms of, lower squared up rate, the bat speed is different there, sure. But I don't think as far as anything we're showed here that would change until maybe we get to the timing stuff, right? Maybe we'll find out that batters are later on fastballs in Seattle than anywhere else. We haven't gotten quite to that point yet, but now that you've brought it up, I'm 100% gonna look at it.
Hi, we've had Statcast data available from AAA in the Florida League. With a lot of more Hawkeye units being installed throughout minor league baseball, do we expect more data to become publicly available, or maybe not?
I do not expect that. Graham is looking at me and saying, no, probably not. It's available in some ways to some teams. I have no expectation that there's more coming publicly for the moment.
When you guys were talking about how much each pitcher misses bats? Is there going to be a way to see how much or how far off hitters are from hitting a certain pitch?
Yeah, it would work on both sides. Look at it from the pitcher's point of view. It would be the same for the batter. The example I showed was Giancarlo Stanton going wild after a Jacob Webb sweeper. So pretty much everything we do, you can look at from the batter's point of view and the pitcher's point of view. Not everything actually matters for both sides.
So I think at this point, the arm angle for pitchers is updated yearly, if I'm not mistaken. Is there any plan to increase the cadence so that you could detect changes throughout the course of a season?
I don't think that's true. I think that it is updated daily, right? Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
We really like the Sean Manaea, like by month, his arm angle is dropping. So that should already be there every
Okay.
day.
Just a quick clarification, with the bat acceleration broken down into time windows, is the start of the swing still defined 150 milliseconds before closest point of contact?
Yeah, or when bat tracking data starts, which is usually about there.
I was just wondering, is the closest point of contact, is that determined by where the bat could have been at the right time, or is it just the closest point of contact?
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, whether we're trying to show contact or what we call the intercept point, which is like the closest point where they would have met, which we kind of have to do if it's a miss because we're not going to have contact point. We have time for one more.
I wondered, I thought I was looking at percentages, but they didn't add up to 100. So what are the units on your bat acceleration table? Because fractions. So
Yeah, those aren't not percentages. I don't think they're in miles per hour or milliseconds over particular miles per hour. Unless I'm misunderstanding, right? No percentages. Yeah.
No, you're right. It's components of speed or time.
Yeah. I think that's all we have time for. So we're going to kick it over to Graham. Thank you very much.
So my name is Graham Goldbeck, Senior Product Manager on the MLB side for our tracking data systems. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about the automated balls and strikes or ABS challenge system. So hopefully, I'm hoping at this point it's ABS or robo-ump, it's colloquially referred to a lot, is something everyone's kind of heard of at this point. We've been testing in various forums since 2019 in the Atlantic League. We've been testing in the minors since 2021 in different forums. And in 2023, we started the challenge system as well. The idea here with ABS is using tracking data to educate balls and strikes. So again, hopefully a lot of you have seen this in action already, whether that be in AAA last year or in spring training this year. If you haven't, we are doing this right now across 5 ballparks here: Peoria, Surprise, Goodyear, Camelback, and Salt River Fields every day. So if you haven't made it out to game in those places yet, highly recommend it. But if you haven't seen it yet, here's kind of what it looks like. So this was the first challenge in the Grapefruit League this year. You see the catcher taps his head to signal to the umpire that he wants to challenge what the umpire ruled on that pitch, which was a ball.
He thought that was a strike. So let's take a look.
This was the first one. This was a little slower than usual. First one for everyone. Everyone's learning. We'll see a replay in a sec. I left the video a little long for this reaction in particular. Kevin Cash, former catcher himself, obviously like that one. So again, that one is just a first challenge. Everyone's kind of still learning. We've been testing this in AAA last year, and players are very good at it. So this is a challenge that could actually like swing a ball game.
3-2 pitch is on its way to Baldwin. It is called strike 3. Tap of the helmet for Baldwin. You got to make this move. Stripers have one challenge left, and they'll use it here to see if this game is over or if it's extended. It is extended. It's outside. Ball 4, bases loaded. How about that? 1.2 inches, says ABS, outside of the strike zone. So it goes from a near handshake and a job well done for Alvarado to now facing Yuli Gurriel. The third goes Bolt, the second goes
Gurriel would go on to hit a single in the next pitch and walk off the game. So ABS can challenge can change the results of the game as well. As you can see here, this game was going to be over, challenged it, went from a strike to a ball, and then his team ended up winning the game. So you guys kind of saw that in action. I just want to kind of diagram how this works end to end here. Pitch happens, the batter, pitcher, or catcher, those are the three people who can challenge a call. They have a couple seconds basically to do that. They cannot look into the dugout, and at that point, the home plate umpire can rule that the challenge is not allowed. They basically have to make the decision themselves. The umpire signals that the challenge happens. They start announcing the challenge. At that point, our operator cues up the challenge. You can see the graphic changes from this blue to pink in this case, because it's sponsored by T-Mobile. Then the scoreboard switches to it. The umpire announces it. The challenge graphic plays out. And then the umpire announces results of the challenge. And all in all, it takes somewhere between 15 and 20 seconds. I think from head tap to getting the challenge on the screen in AAA, I heard we were down to like 5 or 6 seconds or so. So doesn't add a whole lot of time to the game, and it helps take care of a lot of the issues if a big missed call happens. Kind of what we're looking for here. So like I said, this has been testing in spring this year. People, at least from what I've seen, have been pretty happy with it from a player standpoint, from a coach standpoint, from a fan standpoint. So at least so far, we're fairly encouraged. But you have some questions like, okay, why did we bring challenge here? We've been also testing full ABS in the minors for a number of years. Why did you decide to go this route? So I just want to kind of share a little bit of that information with you. So here we go. So we did a polling of fans. This is throughout last year in AAA parks where we had challenge games and full ABS games, just kind of asking people what they like the most. And you can see here, challenge is the most popular choice at 47%. Interestingly enough, people preferred human umpires to full ABS by 30%, 23%. And given the second choice, challenge is also still the most popular, and then full ABS the least popular. When I first saw this, I was surprised. Like I had assumed, and I think a lot of us here had kind of assumed that if you get the call right some of the time, why would you get the call right all the time? But getting the call right is kind of an interesting way of putting it. I think what we're learning with this is like, the idea of the strike zone, if you really take a step back for a sec, the idea of the strike zone really is just to like force the pitcher to kind of throw more hittable pitches that the batter will swing at. And I think what we're seeing with this a lot with full ABS is like there's some amount of rigidity there that people don't seem to like. And we'll kind of get into more of that in a little bit. But fans aren't the only people we're concerned with when it comes to this. We also highly value what players and people on the field think as well. So similarly, we surveyed them and want to know what they thought. And again, very similar results to the fans, even more stark differences. 54% like challenge, the majority, 38% human umpires, and only 8% like full ABS. So in that sense, if it's something that people don't really want, it's not something we want to push down people's throats. So that's why part of the reason we went with the challenge system this spring. And one of the things that challenge happens that works with challenge in the full regular umpire game period of full is this kind of graphic on the left here. So in red, we have like what we call the umpire called zone. I'm sure you've seen a lot of graphs like this at conferences like this one over the years. The idea is that this is like this 50-50 zone where this is the borderline of what umpire kind of generally calls a ball or strike. And you can see the shape of it is kind of circular as opposed to the square rectangle we have with the ABS strike zone. And I think this is just something people like, they probably prefer. You can see on the right, again, similarly, you've probably seen presentations here, the strike zone area-wise, an 0-2 count versus a 3-0 count, the strike zone, grows roughly 20-25%. And that's shrinking and growing of the zone. And I think, again, when you think of it more in terms of like, it's not exactly defined box, it's more like, hey, is that a hittable pitch? Like an 0-2 pitch, you're going to get a lot more weird sliders and you're going to get sweepers and things like that. And it's a much harder time. So they're willing to give the benefit of the doubt because all these calls, and you'll see in a sec, a lot of these calls are all on the borderline. And it's like, no one really knows to precise, sub-inch accuracy exactly where the ball is. Umpires and players have a very good understanding of generally where it is. But when these borderline cases, you just kind of want to be like, hey, just give it to the person who's behind the count. And you don't get that with full ABS. Similarly, like this, one of the things that we kind of look at is like what's happening going on in the game. So this was using AAA data from the end of 2023, but it started at the beginning of 2024 as well. In mid 2024, we went to just going challenge full time. We used to split it pretty evenly days of the week between challenge and full ABS, but we made that switch again because people preferred it. But you can see in the challenge world, I highlighted the swing percentage in particular. People just swung a good chunk less in full games than they do in challenge games, and this was something we were looked at and we had some concern with. Like we don't really want people swinging less because that means more or less balls in play, and you can't obviously have a ball in play if you don't swing the bat. So we were kind of like, hey, why are people behaving different? It's just noise or kind of what's going on? So one of the things we started to look at is just like the actual location of the pitch in full versus ABS and kind of what umpires are calling and seeing if there's some relationship there. And you kind of see like, and so negative numbers on the left are balls that are in the strike zone, and then they're out of the strike zone as they go to the positive. And this is just a swing percentage on fastballs to the top of the zone. And then the bar chart in the back is like umpires calling balls and strikes versus full ABS versus the challenge games. And you can see like right at that 0 line, right on the border of the edge of the zone, there's like a big drop off. Everything in the zone, batters are swinging at pretty much the same amount because they're like, I can do damage here. I'm going to swing. It's right when you start to get the edge of the zone, they're just like in full games, they're just swinging less. And I think intuitively we thought if you had a perfect understanding of the zone, you would swing more because then you'll know for sure like this one is out and this one is in. But since everyone is still kind of unsure of what's happening at the edge of the zone, when you introduce the idea that I think there's certainty there, people just seem to decide to freeze up a bit more. So it was kind of a weird thing we saw. Kind of replicated other parts of the zone. It was most prevalent at the top, but you can kind of see it with breaking balls at the bottom too, and similar parts on the outside part of the plate versus the inside part of the plate. So I think it really comes to is like people are swinging more based on what they think they can do rather than just where the zone is. And where the zone is kind of changes between full and challenge. So again, coming back to this chart, we have the different growing and shrinking of the zone based on count. We kind of refer to that kind of maybe as like an elasticity, the idea that the zone can kind of grow and shrink. And umpires can treat that differently. Like not all umpires grow and shrink the zone at the same rate that we saw. So when we decided to group the umpires together and say, okay, we have a group of umpires that basically have a more full style zone that is a more rigid zone. We have a group of umpires that are more likely to more expand the zone, shrink the zone. And when you group all those buckets together of different umpires, you end up with this similar chart here to what we saw with the full and challenge, where it's just like you have pitchers, some batters swinging less when the zone is more rigid, 46%, and then also pitchers throwing the ball in the zone less, 38, a whole percentage point less there too. So like, it was just kind of what we were seeing is like, it seemed like with the rigidity, like people we're going to end up with more three true outcomes, which I know not everyone wants to see nowadays. So that's kind of why we went to the challenge system. And then you kind of just looking how things go nowadays. This is, I think, update up through like Wednesday or whenever the presentation was due. It's kind of a chart of just like how much of borderline pitches are people challenging. And you see that it kind of goes down pretty steep. Like people know of a very good understanding of the zone. They're calling the most challenges right on things on the edge. And you can see on the chart on the right, it's pretty good here. Like it's just like everyone is like knows roughly where the edge of the zone is. I think the challenge success rate is somewhere in the spring, like 52, 53%. And that was similar to what we saw in AAA. It's like, it's 50-50 deal. Like basically like everyone, the ump, the batter, the catcher, the pitcher, everyone, although I think the pitcher, a lot of teams stopped playing pitcher challenges. I think they probably saw the least success, but at least the batter and catcher and the ump, they're all there at home plate. They're all kind of seeing the same thing. They all know it's roughly in this area. And they're doing a pretty good job challenging it. So, like I said, if you haven't seen it yet, we're still going on in spring here for another couple of weeks. If not, it'll be up in AAA across the nation end of the year. I have nobody coming.
Okay, we're gonna do a hard pivot from Statcast data into game notes, more traditional stats with a hint of Statcast data as well. Briefly, quick show of hands, I'm just curious, you all know what the words game and notes mean, but what do game notes mean together in the baseball industry? Are folks familiar with that term? Okay, so this will be kind of a peek behind the curtain of what broadcasters are looking at and doing on a daily basis. So what are game notes? Game notes are 8+ pages of player, team, and matchup specific stats and storylines. These are all things you're probably very familiar with. We're talking box scores, we're talking game logs, we're talking, various stat tables, various trend lines, et cetera, et cetera. And when I say 8 pages, I mean 8-page minimum. I mean legal size paper, so that's 8.5 by 14, and I'm not talking 12, size 12 times New Roman. I'm talking like size 6. There's a ton of data on this, and it's truly printed out for the broadcast teams on a daily basis. So when is this done? Yeah, it's compiled every day before a game, or sometimes at night prior to the next game. How is it done? PR staff are spending 5+ hours a day compiling these notes. And they're doing so in an InDesign file, which is a Adobe graphic design file. And they're using that because they can just cram more and more stuff into razor thin margins and just cram as much data as possible. And so when you think about game notes, there's sort of 3 levels of customers. There's the PR staff that are compiling these. Ultimately, they're compiling them for the broadcast and media members in the press box. And then ultimately, a subset of that information gets served to fans. So anytime you're watching a game and someone hits a pinch hit grand slam, or a single player has 2 home runs in a single inning, or one player has 9 RBIs in a game, and the broadcaster really, really quickly goes, oh, wow, the last time that happened was, in 2004 against the Rockies, against this pitcher. Well, the reason for that is they're referencing their game notes really, really quickly. All right, to take a look at what game, hopefully you can kind of see that. I know it's really small. Like I said, we're talking size 6 font here. And I pulled this from the Cubs. This is their game notes from a random game in September, and just a very, very small snippet. So on the left, you can see Cody Bellinger's player card with, very traditional stats. We're talking his average, home runs, RBIs, his active hitting streak. Looks like he's got an active hit list streak going of 2 games. And a whole bunch of numbers and a whole bunch of words there. All right, now multiply that by every single batter, every single pitcher, and a whole lot of other stat tables, not just, player level stats, but just team level stats as well, like you have on the right side with their highs and lows. The reason why I'm talking about all this is that PR staff are doing this on a daily basis. They're compiling these notes. They're incredibly error prone because there's not a single website or application that I know of that prints information looking like that. And that's sort of how broadcasters like to look at it on a 1-pager, or in this case, an 8-pager. So this is incredibly tedious, and this process is very error prone. You're updating a lot of these numbers just from last night's box score, and it's very easy to fat finger some numbers or just simply miss something from the box score. So MLB sort of took a stab over the last year at building our own game notes application for broadcasters. And apologies, I was going to do a live demo, but we got to stick to the slides here. And so I'll kind of just talk about briefly what our application looks like, and will be available to media members and broadcasters. Is really just a web view that you can hunt around in really quickly and find various stat components, like the last time it happened component, for instance. When was the last time there was a 9 RBI game? Oh, click this link, check out the box score for that game level detail back in 2005, or whenever the last time it happened was. Player stats, like you see on the left with Cody Bellinger, every single player, club highs and lows, player highs and lows, et cetera, et cetera. Why are we doing this? So number one, reducing errors. Automating game notes eliminates a lot of clerical errors done by the PR staff. I'm not blaming them here, right? Like, anyone is going to make these clerical errors when you're doing every single stat for every single night times 162 games. But secondly, it drives innovation. We're talking about a lot of traditional stats here, but there are some Statcast bullets that we add here, such as like someone's pitch arsenal, or home run breakdown, home run leaderboards with exit velocities and bat speed and those types of things. But what this really allows MLB to do is drive more innovation. So instead of the PR director spending 5 hours compiling all these stats, now that all of a sudden they've got more time to, for instance, spend looking at Baseball Savant and all the things that we just saw over this last hour, all of a sudden they can start adding more and more storylines for their broadcaster teams, specifically, to more interesting storylines around Savant and Statcast and all those types of things. Number three, it's broadcaster friendly, what we're working on. It's one template. So like right now, the Cubs game notes are different from the Rockies game notes, which are different from the Giants game notes, which are different from the Dodgers game notes, et cetera, et cetera. Every game notes is a unique snowflake. And so one template, now all of a sudden the broadcaster knows where that last time it happened section is, or where, a various stat component is. It should be much easier to kind of find that. And ultimately, the fan watching is going to get slightly more enriched and quicker and faster data served to them. And then lastly, it does restore sanity for the PR staff. We want to keep them in mind. It is not peak enlightenment to be updating the player's slash line 162 times a year. Let's move into 2025 and sort of, embrace technology here. And anyways, that's it for a little peek behind the curtain on game notes and what broadcasters will be utilizing in the future. Any questions for myself or Graham? Feel free to fire away.
Can you just clarify? I wasn't sure. I understand the game notes thing is about Cody Bellinger, et cetera, but you also mentioned that things come up in a game, a switch hitter hits a home run lefty and righty, or a pitcher walks 10 batters. You can't possibly have every weird scenario planned. So I know you had the game notes for these players, but when something odd comes up in the game, how does the broadcaster get information for that?
Yeah, great question. You're right. We definitely can't. If we were to plan for every scenario, that 8-page document would be a 500-page document and just unreadable. Usually, I am not an expert in this, but usually broadcast teams will, especially if it's like a national broadcast as well, have, like a Statcast or a stats researcher kind of, behind the scenes and very ready to kind of just, we're not going to get that information in real time. But maybe like the next half inning break or something that researcher is utilizing various industry specific tools, and then relaying that information. And then like, the next batter, the next half inning or whatever they find it, they kind of return to that bullet point.
Is this going to be some sort of like AI generated search model that the broadcasters could use in game to type out a question and have results returned? And if that is going to be the case, will that ever be publicly available?
I think the first answer, the answer to the first part of that is no. And apologies, this would make more sense to show a live demo here. But a lot of this data is very structured data. We have very structured data with home runs and stats and all these different things. And in general, AI is going to solve a lot of problems and pretty really interesting from a baseball perspective. But when we're dealing with like really structured data, our learning has been that AI isn't necessarily the first route to go. With a lot of the structured data, we have it and we know how to serve it. And so we're going to kind of just rely on good old fashioned sort of just, SQL and engineering fundamentals there.